It's best we remember, because lest we forget that we know how this country's founded. There's no proper law here, no treaty, no consent. Obviously means there's no jurisdiction. Well, that's an in for us all here. It's not their law. It's not their land. And we get, at the present time, the government's talking about a treaty. What are they talking about? A little domestic law? Or are they talking about a sovereign treaty, where the international community's involved to make sure that things go down the right way? And what is Daniel Andrews talking about 230 years after the fact? Where they want to justify their occupation? I think it's very timely that this is going on right now. For me, as far as I'm concerned, people just, if you're homeless, go and take one of these houses.
Right on.
As far as my people are concerned, you know, we don't like to see anybody suffering. We understand. We understand that fully. And when there is people who are desperate, and you know, causes trouble everywhere. But this is by design, folks. Why is it necessary for anybody in this rich country here, in this country, with so much land and so much wealth, that there's anybody going without? It's not really about looking after the people in this country. It's about capitalism. It's always been that. And what motivated the invasion of this country was greed and global domination. Hopefully this is the beginning of something that can really tip this system upside down. You know, I believe that this is a gutless, weak system you got here. A gutless, pathetic government. Not legal. They're corrupt to the eyeballs. Just means, for me, it just means a matter of people getting off their hands and knees and standing up, and this bullshit system will fall over. That's all it means. I've had a saying, I don't like it, but Australia's never had a revolution, but it's always been revolting. Let's change that, folks. And let's create a proper legal foundation in this country. And we can take it all back. Now, our people, the law of this land is basically about sharing and caring and looking after the land and the people. That's why we're able to survive so successfully on this land. You know, 200 years ago, this was a pristine environment. You could actually swim in the Yarra there and catch fish and eat them. You know, and look, just testimony to what's going on in this country. Look at the Barrier Reef, one of the 7 wonders of the world, trashed. If you ever have to go to court, ask us, if you're on our team, ask us to step in front of the court for you. We'll sort that. You won't see the inside of the court, guaranteed it. And it's whose land, whose law. And these boxes here, we paid for them, Indigenous people, with our blood. So we're saying, take them, use them. You're just going to waste here. And stand up to this criminal government here. That's what they are. And we can win this. There's no reasons for anyone to be suffering in this country. I just want to pay my respects to all the Indigenous people who've struggled in this country for the last 200 years. Strangely, I can see a little bit of light on the horizon. Small light. That's enough for us. We haven't seen that before. And it's good to see everyone here standing together for basic human rights needs. Shelter. And I believe one of the reasons why human rights is not recognised in this country is because they denied us our humanity. The country was based on denying the original people their humanity. And if Australia was to get a human rights now legislation, they'd be bankrupt. They can't coexist. So what do you want to do, folks? Stand up. You know? Otherwise, this is going to get tighter and tighter, and the screws will keep coming down and down on you. You know? We owe it to our future generations, and my people, we owe it to our ancestors. Thank you.
Thanks, Robbie, for the welcome to the country and kicking this event off. Robbie mentioned, lest we forget, tomorrow's Anzac Day and they're going to have a minute of silence. Today is 27 days of HPU and broader collectives we're not remaining silent. The union's motto is no longer the unheard voice. So what we're saying is outrage. We've got outrage about what's happening here. Is there any Victorian police in the crowd? Yeah. Step forward. You know, you can become a human at any time. We don't have to stick to this folklore history of down came the troopers, 1, 2, 3 at the behest of the land barons to kick the people off the land. Yeah. And define their humanity and dismiss their humanity. Because on your shoulder it says uphold the right, or it's your role to maintain the peace, but we haven't got peace. We're at war, yeah? This is a war on our humanity, and this hasn't just started 27 days ago. This has been going on for generations. We were watching a movie last night about the 1930s and people getting evicted from their homes, and, you know, disparity in wealth and disparity in political voice and disparity in health, education, employment, yeah? As soon as you take this housing brick out of your human rights, Article 25 to human rights, all of these other human rights start to disintegrate as well. So it's really important, really important. It's a fundamental building block of our social fabric, our social cohesion, that we're not marginalising people. When we started this action, we were pretty sure we knew who had their fingers in the pie. It's the same cabal of, you know, elite fascists who are profiteering off of people's disadvantage and their the humanitarian impact that homelessness has on people's lives and on our community. And that was the Collingwood Football Club, the Salvation Army, and the government. But we haven't really got government, we've got politics. Yeah, this race to the bottom of these political parties talking there that they're, you know, and it's an attack on our human rights and democracy, the way that they're behaving, when they're not transparent, when they're not accountable, when they're trying to pass the buck and blame the victim. That's what they're doing. You know, we got a letter from the Department of Homeland Security the other day, or the Homeland Insecurity, or whatever they call themselves, but basically it was trying to blame people. We're standing in the way of people having housing. No, we're not. Bang, we open up housing, yeah? We're not standing in the way of anybody having housing, because this is our public assets, and the government are just the carekeepers of those public assets, and if they're not meeting the terms of the contract that they were elected into, they've breached that contract, yeah? So fuck them, yeah? Yeah. Maybe not the thoroughbred that they rode in on, yeah? But, and it's not much has changed since those jolly swagman days, you know, with the, you know, down came the troopers, 1, 2, 3, and it's time that that does change, yeah? We've been really disfragmented, you know, fragmented as a community, and what's happening here in this fight for our human rights and our basic human rights, because we've got aunties sleeping in cars, we've got aunties prostituting themselves, we've got brothers getting stabbed under bridges, we've got people who've lost their self-worth and their dignity, and they've been vilified by the mainstream media and blamed, yeah? And the impact that has on somebody's potential. We were born with this potential that is being shaped and misshaped into something that's, you know, toxic. So I'm really happy to see the community come down. I want to thank Friends of Public Housing. I want to thank Flat Out. I want to thank single mothers, and I want to thank the Greens and Stephen Jolly Swagman and Sue Bolton, you know, for adding in their support, and Ellen Sandel, you know. But really, I want to say that I'm really proud to stand alongside people who are prepared to stick tough, yeah, and occupy these spaces and raise awareness. And I'm humbled by the people that I stand alongside, and I take my hat off to you.
Coming down today, these 3 weeks, I'd just like to thank Kelly, Jane and Joel for their cooperation in making sure that everything was safe and well for the people around here. We've had no problems with security or alcohol or anything. It's been well done. I'd just like to say that before I start. I'd just like to say, I was laying in bed the other night. I thought to myself, gee, I'm bloody lucky, you know. And I thought about the people out there that haven't got a roof over their head. People that, you know, on a cold wintry night, who've only got a couple of bucks in their pocket, and they've got to make up their minds whether they're going to go to a There's no room in the crisis accommodation, and they've got to make up their minds if they go to a ramshackle pub or a slanty accommodation place, or make the choice of that or sleeping on the streets. You know, it's a terrible dilemma, and it's really taking over society. We've got to do something about this. It's terrible. Some of the things that are out there are, you know, since this 3 weeks, a young girl was on the veranda there the other day with her dog, and it nearly brought me to tears. I said, "Hey, how are you going, love?" She was crying. I said, "What's wrong?" She said, "Oh, well, you know, things are not going so well." I said, "Is that your little mate there?" "Yeah." She said, "That's my little mate, Crystal." She said, "She sleeps on the street with me every night." You know, they've got nowhere to go. These are the things that are so terribly important to the community. That, you know, people are shunning this thing. This is what I'm trying to say. Why shun this? This is just as important as the East-West link ever was, in my opinion. The East-West link was about properties and transport and, you know, the environment. This is about people's lives. You know, we're dealing with people dying on the street every night of the week, or not every night of the week, but there is quite a number of young people dying on our streets in the winter months. You know, now that the winter's coming on, a lot of them won't be here for Christmas. It's a terrible, terrible bloody thing, this. I really must say we've got to get behind it. We should use this as a platform to sort of start a campaign, same as we did with the East-West link, and really get it moving and get lots of people involved in it, because there's no other worthy cause in this. It is the most terrible, terrible thing in the human race today. It just gets to me. It really does. Anyway, I wish you all the best in the future, and you know, it'll come. I remember when we first had our meeting up at the Leinster Ranch, we had 6 people there, and within months we had 7,000 marching down Swanson Street. So I would say that this campaign, if it gets going, you'll get plenty. All the best, Kelly.
I just wanted to talk a little bit about the fact that the government want to turn these properties into either transitional housing or community housing. And I just wanted to talk a little bit, I know a lot of people here have been homeless, but a little bit about what it's like to go through that system right from the beginning, because people who find themselves homeless are already traumatised usually. Just to know you don't have somewhere to sleep for the night is one of the most frightening, horrific things anyone can go through. And then to try and get some help. There's what's called entry points scattered around Melbourne, not necessarily all that convenient and not altogether accessible. I know at the one in Sashes, it's in Sunshine. If you don't get there at 9 a.m. and line up, you won't even get seen, no matter what your circumstances. And pretty much what I find is that people who are homeless and already traumatised are traumatised further through their engagement with the homelessness system. They, you know, if they get seen, if they get into a so-called entry point, they may be given a few nights in a motel somewhere. I've known women to get raped in those motels. Most of them aren't very nice, safe places. Then if they're very, very lucky and they can keep fronting up to these agencies, they may eventually, if someone's paid a huge amount to keep them in emergency housing, someone might decide to take pity on them and put them in transitional housing. Now, that's definitely a step up from homelessness and transitional housing, but the problem is that there's no public housing for people to move towards when they get out of transitional housing. Now, as a worker in that system, to put someone into transitional housing, I have to immediately, the day they're signed up, have an exit plan for that person. And it can't just be public housing, because we know that there is none to put people in. And it's all very well to have transitional housing, but where are you transitioning to? This is the issue. And I mean, because it's such a clogged up system, people spend sometimes 2 years in transitional housing. They're just getting settled. They're just getting some community around them, some supports in that area. And of course, then if a property is found for them, they've got to move on. And I mean, when you put your name down for public housing, you can't be really specific to live in a certain suburb. You've just got to pick a broadband area. So again, you're uprooted. If you've got any children, they've got to change school again. And everything you've built up to get yourself settled in the last couple of years is taken away from you all over again. And it's a suggestion that you're somehow flawed, that during the time you're in transitional housing, you'll repair yourself so that you're acceptable, whatever that means. And the truth is, it's not the people that are flawed, it's the system that's flawed. And we just can't keep moving people on, depriving them of community, because that's what we all need. We're communal people. This is what we need. I'd just like to talk a little bit too. One other thing that someone mentioned, the lady with her dog the other day, is that pets aren't allowed in either transitional or emergency housing. And some people will actually choose to sleep in their car or on the street. I know I would. I wouldn't leave my dogs. There are services that will look after the dogs or cats for a little while, but it's just not fair, because that's the only friends some people have, like this young woman that was here the other day that Keith mentioned. Also, I'd like to say that the other thing I'd like to talk about is prisons, because Flat Out works with women who are exiting prison. Just recently I met a woman close to 70 who had been living in public housing for 20 years, and she's been given a 12-month jail sentence. Now that means she's now lost that property. This woman's going to come out of prison to homelessness. And I mean, how does that benefit anybody? The Office of Housing will only hold a property for 12 weeks if someone's in rehab or prison, possibly even hospital. I'm not sure about that. I'm sure you'd be a bit more worthy if you're going to hospital than if you're going to prison in their eyes. But pretty much that woman at her age is going to come out of prison next year and be back in that emergency housing system at her age, having to go through all of that when that home could have been held for her. You know, how many resources is it going to take when she comes out of prison for her to again have a support worker, go through emergency housing, which might mean motels, going into transitional housing again? She had a community in the area she lived. She has friends and relatives in that area, and the likelihood of her ever being able to afford to live in that area again is really unlikely. Also, if the government won't supply public housing, they definitely need to look at doing something about tenure for people who are private renters and making things more in the favour of the tenant rather than a landlord who can just kick you out with 60 days notice. And again, your whole life's, you know, it's just outrageous, our priorities in this society in this day and age. Okay, I think I just want to cover some things today because last time I got a little bit carried away. The other thing I wanted to mention was parents who can't access suitable accommodation often end up having their children removed from their care. And this is it doesn't mean that child's unsafe. Even if they're sleeping in the car with mum or dad, I'm sure the child would rather be with mum or dad than be in foster care. What we have to do is stop punishing people having a whole child protective system just focused on removing Aboriginal and children whose parents aren't wealthy, basically. We don't ever see anyone who's middle class and white in the children's court fighting to keep their child. Yet you can walk in there any day and you'll see people that are living in poverty, and you'll see First Nations people, and children are being removed at a rate that it's the same. It's actually getting worse. And this all comes down to the fact you're only valued in this society for what you have. If you've got money, you can get good lawyers. You can fight if you've got money. But the sad thing is they don't even try and fight you if you've got money. If you're a middle class white person, they wouldn't dare, because the system would be exposed for what it is, the unfairness that happens every day. As long as houses are seen as a commodity and not every person's human right, and, being poor or vulnerable shouldn't mean you're at constant risk of homelessness. I just think that we really have to call upon government. We have to keep this going. It's a non-violent, I guess, civil disobedience, if you like, but it's definitely for the greater good. No one's hurting anybody here. Making a stand is really, really important, because this issue can't just continue to be swept under the table. I just want to thank everyone again for coming, and to please keep supporting this action, because the people who spend a lot of time here get burnt out and tired. And although they might look like they've got everything together, sometimes they get pretty worn down in trying to keep the fight up. So maybe put yourself on a roster to come down regularly, or offer some sort of help that they can rely on. And I think, you'll be doing a great thing. Thank you for listening. Thanks so much.
Hi everybody, my name's Fiona. I'm from Friends of Public Housing, and I'm here with Jeremy, my friend and neighbour and colleague. And can everybody hear me? Yeah. I have the rather unenviable task of trying to explain the differences between public, social and community housing. So please bear with me if it gets a little bit dry, but it is very important to understand the distinctions. The word social housing is being used as an umbrella term to cover both public housing and community housing. And this is quite confusing, because public housing and community housing are completely different models. So to call both housing models social housing just serves to kind of muddy the waters and make the whole privatisation by stealth of public housing easier to go under the radar. So at Friends of Public Housing Victoria, we try to avoid the word social housing because of this confusing aspect to it. So the basic difference between community housing and public housing is that community housing is private interest business model housing, and community housing organisations can either manage or both manage and own former public housing properties due to the transferring of the stock. And only public housing is both government owned and government managed. So the question is, who are the community housing organisations? We hear so much about them, and yet there's no coverage in the news that explains to people, who they are and why we should be alarmed, because that's our position. So community housing organisations consist of 8 big property developers, 34 other community housing providers, and a further 32 organisations that are not subject at all to government regulations. And they all can have a different mode of operating. So this gives you an idea. We've got all in all over 70 community housing organisations, and it gives you an idea of what a hodgepodge the sector is and how rent setting varies from organisation to organisation, and the importance of people reading carefully their leases. The basic difference between public and community housing is that community housing is basically private not-for-profit companies. But do not believe that this means that they are not profit-driven. So let's look at the financial year of 2014, and you'll see that in that year, Port Phillip Housing, one of the big 8, made over $4.5 million surplus. And Yarra Community Housing also made over $4.5 million. And Housing Choices made over $2,300,000. So when they represent themselves as struggling charities, that's not exactly the case. So what we're saying is that the warm fuzzy words not-for-profit, community and social housing can be misleading. And the boards of these companies often consist of corporate types, including lawyers, developers, management staff, but very few ordinary citizens, let alone tenants, on their boards, and their salaries can be enormous. The following rights that are present in public housing are often absent in community housing, especially once they receive the titles, which is what their intentions and objectives are. So public housing rents are rebated, that is, they're pegged at 25% of income and are adjusted according to your changes in circumstances. They go up or down according to your state of employment, your health, etc. And this security is really found in community housing. They may have a limited hardship clause attached to their leases at the very best. Public housing offers the traditional protection of permanent tenure with no fixed contracts, which is what community housing tenants often find they are subject to. Public tenants, unlike those in community housing, and this is a very, very important point, we have the full and unequivocal protection of the Human Rights Charter. And I think the community housing sector has actually been quite poor in their attitude to the Human Rights Charter. So they have actually put in a submission to the Human Rights Review, arguing why they should not be compulsorily expected to consider the Charter when dealing with evictions, etc. The eligibility criteria for public housing is such that it does not discriminate against people on pensions or low incomes. Community housing criteria is broader as it caters for the low to middle income bracket, so in effect they can cherry pick and choose who can afford to pay them more rent. These are very big departures from traditional values that have underpinned public housing. Also, in community housing, you can be subject to rather demeaning codes of conduct clauses, which you're not subjected to in public housing. So once the CHOs, the community housing organisations, own the titles, there's a frightening lack of governmental guidelines, and none of them are legally binding anyway. The main proviso is that rents be affordable to tenants while financially sustainable for the business. And affordable often means 75% of market rents, and it relies on Commonwealth rent assistance to make it in any way affordable, and this payment goes directly to the landlords. The growth and expansion of community housing includes plans for the titles of 12,000 public housing properties, over and above the amount of properties that have already been gifted to them. And this will be a disaster, we believe, for the people on pensions and at the lowest end of the economic scale who find themselves living in housing stress, couch surfing, in boarding houses or homeless. The privatisation by stealth of public housing is a disaster in the making, and we need to give a very clear message to the government that we will not tolerate it. Thank you. I'd like to thank Jeremy, because Jeremy and I worked on this morning.